Hi everyone, I'm Paweł, and today I'm going to talk about emulators for Azure. So first and most important question is what I can get from this talk. Anyone can ask. In my opinion, few things. First one, what is the problem of developing software for Azure? Second, how to reduce costs of development environments maintenance for a business. And the third one, how to improve and speed up your local environment while you are working with Azure. So, as someone who's not working with Azure, you are probably thinking what you can get from that talk. And to be honest, not much. You can learn here and understand why emulators are sometimes better than deployed resources. And also, you just have to remember that Azure is not only player in the game. And if Azure applies something, there is a big chance that AWS or Google Cloud provider will do the same in some months or years, if they haven't done it already. So when we are after introduction, what is the plan basically? So first thing, I'm going to show you cloud problems for a developer and for the business. Secondly, I will show you available Azure options with demos and some measurements I did. And thirdly, I will summarize everything and show you some action item you can use in your own work. So what are the problems as a developer when you are working with cloud? So first thing is that you need time to deploy. Sometimes CI/CD pipeline takes 3 minutes, sometimes it takes 40 or 50. It really depends on your complexity, and most of the time you can't change it. It depends on your company policy. So it takes time. Second thing is that you are sharing resources with other people. So you can imagine that you are with other developer working on the same file and you want to remove it, but he wants to change the data in it. You will have an unwanted interaction, you have to contact with him and get some time when you can do your own and he can do his own. And the third thing is that you can't recreate resources with no data very often, because you have to contact with the whole team and let them know, hey, I'm deleting that resource because I want to check something, how our application behaves without data in, for example, that particular table or container. So really, what it adds is that you have to do some communication and let other people know what you are doing right now. And it's an extra time which can be saved for you if you have an emulator. So what business have to do with it? Basically money. They have to pay for CI/CD pipelines. They have to pay for all requests which a developer using on dev environment. So if request has 100 megabytes, business has to pay for it. If they are making million requests a day, they have to pay for it. Probably the most asked question by people from business is, can we pay less? And my mission today is to prove that sometimes we can, and it's a win-win situation, because more money in company, more stable it can be in most cases. So Azure Local Emulators, star of the show. Pros and cons of it. So pros are time. You don't have to deploy resources, you have them locally, requests are much faster. Second thing, money. You don't have to pay for all the requests you do, you don't have to pay for the size of the request, you can do as many as you want and still it's free. Third thing is independence. When we were talking about developers interacting with other developers when they're working on the same resource, with Azure Emulator you can get rid of that issue. Going to cons, you have to remember that Emulator is not the same as deployed resource. They will have some slight differences and we can't change it. So at the end of the day, something is very specific to deployed resource, you can't use Emulator. I will show maybe some example with Azure SQL. And also, there are difficulties to set up on corporate computer, because corporate computers sometimes lack of administrative privileges. You just have to do some things in console and it can be blocked. You have to make some requests and it can take some time. But yeah, that can be an issue at the end of the day. So I'm going to show you 3 available options. First one is Cosmos DB Emulator, second is Azure SQL Server Emulator, and the third one is Storage Account Emulator, known by Azurite. Before talking about every other emulator we have, I'm going to show you an application with which I will present some demos. So application I'm going to show you is a very simple application which has a library management system, we can say. It has only one entity, which is book, and it's using Mediator. It has three main methods, one which is using SQL and getting books from SQL Server database, other one which is using blob storage to upload some file, and the third method used to communicate with Cosmos DB. There's no hard logic. Those API endpoints are just created to have a communication with different resources. So I'm going to start from the differences between Cosmos DB emulator and deployed resource. So what I did here is that I had a 1 megabyte document with JSON data and created new item with it 100 times. And there were 3 tries from remote and 3 tries from local services. And probably real case scenario would be to use parallel upload, but I wanted to check how much time it's going to take to really upload a single file. And configuration on the user level was set the same, 400 requests units. And as you can see right here, the difference is huge. For a local environment, it took around 10 seconds, but for the remote resource, it took from 500 to 370 seconds to do that whole operation, which is a huge difference if you want to do it a few times a day. Okay, so in order to get the emulator, you have to enter the link which I've added in a description, or you can just search Azure Cosmos DB emulator in Google and get to that link. Here is the download the Azure Cosmos DB emulator. You have to download it, run the whole installing process, and then you should have ability to run Cosmos DB emulator. You just click enter. You will have administration privileges asked. I'm going to say yes. Now the process is happening in the background, and after some time my browser should open automatically. That process has started. It can take 10 seconds, it can take 50. As you can see, here it is, Azure Cosmos DB emulator. There are all values you will probably need, the primary key and URI. There are guides how to set up for some different programming languages. But here is the most important thing, the Explorer. As you can see, I don't have any container yet, so let me create one. So in order to create a database on a container, I have to know the names for them. You will probably get them from your deployed Azure environment, but I don't have one. So I have one in app settings.json already added. So my database name is new testing library. I'm going to copy that and create a new database with that name. Here we go. And then I'm going to create a container for it. New container. I'm choosing that database. My container name is some new container. New. I'm going to add it here, and there is partition key information. I've got something like Cosmos DB 1 megabyte document, which is basically the document I used for that measurements. But as you can see, here is the partition key with exactly the same name. So I'm going to use that one. I'm copying it. I have to add / partition key. Nothing more, just click OK. And here we are, the container is created. In order to check if it works, we have to provide a connection string, and we have to check it in our application. So first thing, I need a connection string. I'm going to go to quick start, primary connection string, copy that one. That's probably the same because I've already said it, but we can do it again. So paste, I'm saving it. Here we are. I'm going to run the application. Okay, I'm going to use that breakpoint, API main document, try that. So I have my file selected. I'm going to execute a function. Here we go, 200 response code. I have my ID. And now when I will refresh the page in my localhost, I see the document which I have uploaded. So the only thing I had to do was to set a configuration in my app settings.json and also set up the environment, which as you've seen was very quick. Now going to storage account, I have used one 100 megabyte file and speed, as you can see, is really different. 900 milliseconds to 53,000. It's a lot, but you have to remember that speed really depends on the tier and type of storage account and blob storage. I was using the most basic free version in my private Azure account, so it will be faster on probably production environment, but every megabyte stored on Azure costs money, and if there is any free alternative, why don't you use it? So how to install Azurite? There are a few options, as you can see. I'm using the NPM version just of convenience, and that's how I was well learned, but probably you can use either of them and there will be no big difference at the end of the day. I'm going to show you how I'm using NPM. You have to firstly install it globally, so you have to have NPM Manager installed on your machine along with Node.js. The appropriate version is added here, Node.js version 8.0. So how to run an Azurite? What you need to do is enter a place where you want to have your Azurite. I can say maybe right here. I will create a directory Azurite. I will enter there, create a terminal here. And the only thing I have to do is basically type a command right here. I have prepared a command for that, which goes Azurite, blobPort, queuePort and tablePort. What it's basically saying is that it is setting a specific blobPort, queuePort and tablePort different than default ones, because default ones can be used by Azure Function and we don't want to have weird interactions, so I'm just using those ports as those are not used by anything. We just click enter, and as you can see, 3 of the services Azurite has started right now. In Microsoft documentation we can find the connection string right here. I'm just going to copy it, edit it a little, so going into Notepad, taking that one and changing the ports to the appropriate ones. So 99889.0, 8889, and also 4 times 8. I'm going to copy that one and add it into my Visual Studio configuration for a blob connection string. So I'm going to remove that one as it's probably the same, but here we go, my connection string. Okay, so you're probably thinking how I'm going to create a container for it. So you will need Azure Storage Explorer. It's basically a tool to go through blob storage, Azure Table or Azure Queue. In order to get it, you go into a website which I've added in the description, or you just find that one in Google and go into the second or first website. There you can select operating system, and once you select your operating system, it should download automatically. So Windows, here we go, save, and here I've got it. You can go through the installation, and once you are done with it, you should find something like Azure Storage Explorer. I'm going to open it. Here I've got it. And I can select my storage account, which I have created a moment ago. It's running still here in the background. So I'm going to storage accounts. I will connect to storage. It's a local storage emulator. I'm going to name it local YouTube video. Account name can stay the same. I'm going to modify the blob ports, queuePort, 8889, that was the 8, and that's the 90, without using HTTPS because the certificate problem. Click just yes, connect. And here we are. There are no blob containers, queues or tables. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new blob container with a name which is defined here in Visual Studio as my default container. It has just named default. So I'm going to create a blob container named default. And now it's empty. But I can open my Visual Studio and launch my application in order to check if it works. So going into that API, endpoint, try it out. I'm going to choose a file. I have selected file like that. It's a small PDF with one page, and I can execute a command. 200 response. There is a name of a file which was created, and I can go in just in Azure Storage Explorer. There is nothing here yet, but when I will press the refresh button, here it is. I can just double click on it. It will open automatically. Firstly, it will download it to the temp storage. And here's this temp local, and here's my file. So all went great. So 2 or 3 emulators done. What about Azure SQL database or Azure SQL Server? So Azure SQL Database Emulator is basically a containerized version of SQL Server, which Azure is using with most of features. It can be used in CI pipeline for its integration testing, but you have to remember, at the end of the day, it's SQL Server. There shouldn't be a huge difference for a casual development between Azure SQL Database Emulator and normal SQL Server, which you have locally, but you have things which are specific to Azure SQL Server and can be tested only on deployed database because standard local SQL Server is not covering them. Maybe you have something like that, and then Azure SQL Database Emulator is a way to go. So first thing you are going to need is Visual Studio Code with extension SQL Database Projects. When you have installed that one, you can create an SQL database project. So I'm going Ctrl-T and Database Projects New. Here we go. I'm going to use Azure SQL Database. Here's the project name. Let's say YouTube video. Here I'm going to select the location. I'm going to just go into here. Maybe, yeah, here. SDK style project, yes. Are you trust the author? Yes, I do. That's me. Once that's done, we've got our SQL project and nothing more. Once your project is created, you have option with database projects. You can click right here and you have an option of adding an item. You can add a table, view, spreadsheet, a lot of things. I'm lazy. I'm working with .NET with Entity Framework, and there is an option to quickly script a table in the Entity Framework because I'm aware that schema changes all the time, and when you have a real application, it can change even once a week or more often. So keeping it to the date will be really hard. So what I'm doing in that case, I'm just going into my application, Package Manager console. I'm just selecting my main place where I've got the anti-framework stuff infrastructure. I'm going to write a command which goes script migration. We go. We'll start it, succeed, and here we are. There is a script. Copy. Once I have copied my script, I'm going again into Visual Studio Code, selecting pre-deployment script. Here we go, like that. Build it. Exit it with zero code. Okay, great. And now I can go into publish it. Publish to a new Azure SQL database. I'm going to select some port like that one. Now I have to provide some passwords. Okay. Okay, I'm going to use a full version and I accept the terms. The latest version, don't use any profile, that database. And it can take some time, about a minute. So it took around, I think, 5 minutes, so quite longer than I've expected. But when I will go into Docker, I can see my SQLDB project, so let's try to get it here. I have to open SSMS. I've got it right there. Connect, database engine, my localhost 1733. I'm using SQL user SA password. Here we go. I'm connected. So great. There is my database also too, with two tables. One of them is books. And here are some content and books I've expected. I can update one of them. Update books, set title, let's say to SSS, where ID is like that. And as you can see, it's updated correctly. Now let's get it in our application. So first thing is that I need my Visual Studio configuration. I have already configured a connection string right here. It's basically saying localhost. I have to change the port. Database library management DB. Is it the one? No, it's ed.v. I'm going to copy that one, paste it right here. Password as far as I remember. Yeah. And that should be okay. So now I can run the application. Go into the main, as that's the first API which is using database. Execute it. And here is even my title, which I've updated a moment ago. And that's pretty much it from Azure SQL Emulator. So in summary, you now know how to reduce cost of maintaining Azure development environments. You were watching how Azure Emulators can be used on daily work, and you also now even may have an idea how much of your work can be done offline, so you will have ability to work without an internet. At the end, I've got an action item for you. Try to speak to your team and try to get rid of dependencies to remote Azure services while developing locally. For example, if you have appsettings.json in .NET file in your API, which has specified for a dev environment connection strings, even though you are using it for local, you may want to change it. And things I've learned along the way, because I've already did the transition in few projects, is that firstly you have to create SQL and Cosmos DB scripts for seeding data and add them to a repository. So you will always have default values which can be used instead of the deployed resources. Without those scripts, there is pretty much no value of having that data and having an emulator, because you have to do it on your own every time. Also, you have to describe a full process of setting local environment in README file. Step by step, it's pretty simple, but where are the scripts, how to add them, how to add a container, those kind of stuff, because people will then know how to go with your own flow and they just don't have to learn it once again. They will just follow your steps. Also, if you are using Azure Function and you have your own storage account, remember to use ports different than default, like 8888, because Azure Function's storage account uses default 10,000. And set a rule within your team that every time database or Cosmos DB schema changes, you don't allow PR to be merged until scripts are updated. With that manner, you will have an option to always have the last version of a script, so you will have a pretty easy development when there are things changing along the way. So that was all. Thank you for watching. Please leave a comment. If you want to contact me, you have my information in description. So cheers!